y'all, I'm James Wright. Welcome to my shop, and today we're talking about sharpening jigs. Okay, let's dive in. If you know anything about me, you know that I am a big proponent of freehand sharpening. Freehand sharpening is just faster. It is really easy. You just pick up the iron, you sharpen it, you're done. There is no setup, there is no measurement, it's just done. The problem with it is it's harder to learn. It's a skill, and the only way you can learn a skill is to do it, and to do it over and over and over again, and probably mess up all along the way until it just starts to get there. And eventually, over time, you learn the skill. But you can't learn a skill from watching a video. You have to get out in the shop and do it. And that kind of annoys a lot of people, particularly the people who like to watch a lot of YouTube. And so for the beginner out there, I usually say go out and buy a honing guide. The jig actually makes it relatively simple. You can just sharpen and not have to worry about the skill. Get it done, get a sharp tool, and get back to the fun part. And for years, the jig I've recommended is the Veritas Mark II. It's a great jig all around, works really well, and for standard irons and regular chisels, it does really, really well. Now, it is a bit finicky and you have to kind of crank it down, but if you get it set up right, it gives you good results really efficiently. But if you have a thin chisel, it just doesn't do well. Now, they make a thin chisel guide, but then you have to have a whole guide just for thin chisels. Or if you have a really wide iron, it's not going to do those. Or if you have an iron that the two sides aren't parallel, or one side has a ridge, or they're tapers, it just doesn't do them. And so there's a lot of tools that the Veritas Mark II has a problem with. But then in walks Jeff from Reed Planes. Yeah, you know, the guy who makes all of the extras to soup up your hand planes. And he said, I want to make a honing guide. And I said, wait, Jeff, you're a freehand sharpening guy. You teach sharpening and you teach freehand sharpening. Why in the world would you want to make a honing guide? And he responds, I think I can make one that's better than the ones out there. And when you're learning and you want to get up and get going, a guide is really the way to do it. So I said, okay. I mean, I trust him. He's made some really interesting things. Let's see what he can come out with. He said the first thing is, I want a jig that will reference the back of the iron. The back of the iron is almost always flat. So if you can reference a flat surface, you know it's nice and true. The other side is often beveled or shaped and has other oddnesses to it. So if I can reference the back side, I know I'll have a better time at it. Next, he said he doesn't want something that will clamp the top and bottom, because if you clamp the top and bottom, the plane iron can rotate relatively easily. If you clamp the sides, it can't rotate, and so you get a much truer, cleaner edge that's not going to be moving around on you as you're actually doing the sharpening. But there's one other thing that no other jig does. Most of the time when you're sharpening, you're moving the plane along the stone, and you move the blade with the edge perpendicular to the stone. So as you go back and forth, all the scratch patterns drag out the tip. But after doing my plane testing, I found that you actually get a much keener, easier edge if you go in line with the iron. I did a video not too long ago actually sharpening on a concrete block. And yes, you can get a razor sharp edge on a concrete block. But there's a few tricks to it. Number one, if you run perpendicular to the blade, you get this serrated edge that just doesn't work very well. But if you turn it 90 degrees and go along the blade, then you get a really clean edge, even on something very, very coarse. If you look at it under the microscope, here you can see that this is planing 90 degrees to the edge, and you're basically getting this serrated edge. And this is with a very, very fine stone. But if I turn it 90 degrees, and I run along the edge, then you get this really nice, clean scratch pattern that goes all the way along. You don't get that serrated edge, you actually get a really keen edge all the way across. And the cool thing is you can get a very keen edge on a very coarse blade, and the finer you get, the better the edge gets. So running with the edge parallel to the stone will actually give you a better edge. How much better? I'm not 100% sure, but looking at it, it makes me want to do some more spreadsheets, so you might see those coming out soon. The problem is that all other jigs have the wheel running so that the blade runs perpendicular to the stone. So you really can't turn it sideways and do it that way. You're just going to be messing up your roller. So Jeff sent me this prototype with two rails that this actually references against. So you get a nice flat surface. You can clamp this down, roll this in, and lock it down in. It works pretty well. And you have this bearing surface down here. It can sit on here. And look at that. You can go perpendicular. Or if I want to, I could turn it and I can go this way. I can do whatever I want, but I'm going to be wearing out the surface of this. And this really isn't a great balancing, it just doesn't feel quite right. What if I made this a little bit heavier, bigger material so it would wear better? So he sent me this one, and this one works better. This one is far better than this. There's less bounce in it. It actually holds together. It's made out of scrap corian, which actually works pretty well. But again, you're going to be wearing out the surface really quickly if you're running it on the plate. But if that thickness is good, let's bump it up. And so he sent me this one, and this one's really nice. This one actually feels good. The only problem is that it's still a bit light. Even though it's big and heavy duty and there's a large wear surface on there, it's still relatively light. But we want to move across the plate. So what if we put bearing on the bottom of this? Now, we could put wheels so that it will roll this way, but what if you want to turn it this way? What if I want to do multiple different directions or skew the iron? So for that, you got these roller ball bearings, and this, you can roll it this way, you can roll it this way, and that works really well, except for these load up with material really quickly and become crunky, and they just, it feels, I mean, listen to this. Yeah, that's annoying. That's not great. So we need something else. And then he found this stuff. It's just a cheap laminate, or you can get any simple clean plastic, put it on here, and then you can let the slide ride on this really easily, and you can engage the iron and sharpen away. Plus you've got a rail here, so you could set in a depth checker and have it set to the exact same distance and angle every time. And this works out really well, but again, it's kind of lightweight and crunky. But then he sent me this, a really heavy-duty bronze thing. This thing weighs a ton and it feels premium. This thing is just, this is really, really nice. But it's got a couple big benefits. Number one, on the bottom, you'll see these wear points. These are actually hardened steel, so that they wear down incredibly slowly, and you can slide on them very easily for a very, very long time. But number two, the big thing in here are these 3 points. Here you can see 1, 2, 3 points. The problem with clamping the iron in between the brass surfaces is you have those large surfaces, so it allows it to slide around and move. And if the iron isn't parallel on either side or has any other change to it, it's going to clamp funny and not work out well. But if you have 3 points of contact, it's kind of like that stool. It doesn't matter what ground you put it on. When you set it down, it will always crank out, and it will always lock in to give you the same reference contacts. And so if your two sides aren't parallel to each other, it will still lock down. If your two sides have all sorts of mess up on them, it will still lock down onto it. So you can clamp it perfectly on those 3 points. So now the iron is always referencing these 2 bars on the back of the iron. It's clamped between the 3 points so you can hold anything in there. And with this plate, you can set it on here, and I can now sharpen with it across the stone, getting a nice scratch pattern on the edge. And so with a bit more work, he came up with this. This is the final pattern on here. You can see the cast bronze with the wear points, the 3 points of contact inside. This thing actually runs really nicely, and it will clamp all the way up to a 4-inch wide iron, or all the way down to whatever you want. A 16th-inch iron, this will do it. Here's an 1/8-inch iron that you can clamp between those 3 points, lock it down, and now you can sharpen this tiny little iron. And because it's such a heavy brass, it feels good in the hand and still holds on very, very well, even with these fine, tiny little chisels. But what if you want to sharpen a skewed iron? Grab a block of whatnot scrap that you have left over, bore 3 holes that correspond with the 3 rods, then find the angle of your iron, mark the angle, and then cut the angle. Then you'll have these 2 blocks that you can sandwich between. And now the jig will pinch on a skewed iron, so you can make a block for whatever angle you have. So is this enough to move me away from freehand sharpening to a jig sharpening? No, honestly, it's just so fast and easy once you get the skill to just sharpen freehand. That's the way I'm going to do it. But if someone is new and they want to get up and going really quickly, this is a great jig, which I really like. It's got a lot of features you're not going to find on others. Now, it's not going to be the most cost-effective jig. It's actually a little bit more than the Veritas Mark II. But it is nowhere near the most expensive one on the market. And so, I don't know, that's a really good jig. And I think Jeff has really done a great job to put together different things that you're not going to find in any other application and provide a really nice jig. So I will leave links to it down below, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What would you do differently on it? Jeff is going to be reading through the comments as well, and so this is kind of his baby, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he comes up with in the future, because when Jeff says, hey, I've got an idea, I usually listen because he's got some really good ideas, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he has in the future. So let me know your thoughts down below. Do you use a jig? Is this something you'd like to try? I'd love to hear that, and if you have any other suggestions of things that Jeff should make in the future, throw those down below. I'm sure he'll be reading there. Anytime you do put a comment down below, you are actually helping out the channel. So thank you for that. Even if you're putting down a snide remark, I really enjoy those because they help the channel grow. Thank you. But if you really want to help the channel grow, and even if you want to be snide about it, you can join one of these people over here. Those are some of the patrons on Patreon, and there are a lot of amazing people over there. Between patrons and members, people who financially support this channel, you guys are the reason I can actually say what I want to say about this. Even though it's listed on my site, I actually don't make much of any money on these. I do it because I want to get read planes up and running again, and I want to say thank you to Jeff for making some interesting tools. It is the patrons and members that actually support this channel, and I get to say what I want to say. Is this a jig that I'm going to be using every day? No. Is it a jig that I will recommend to beginners? Yeah, it's got a lot of cool features. And so if you like that, then think about becoming a patron on Patreon. I think that'll do it for now. And until next time, have a wonderful day. And if you are a child of the 90s, you've been watching this whole video with one song going through your head, just getting jiggy with it.